My name is David, and I'm 48 years old. I'm a software engineer, divorced for 3 years now, and I share custody of my 12-year-old daughter, Sarah, with her mother. I live in Portland, Oregon, in a modest house in the suburbs that I bought after the divorce was finalized. It's nothing fancy, just a place where Sarah can have her own room, and we can spend quality time together. I work from home most days, which means I get to see more of her than a lot of divorced dads do. Sarah's mother, Jennifer, and I don't get along great anymore, but we try to keep things civil for Sarah's sake. She lives about 20 minutes away with her new husband, and honestly I don't think about their life much. I focus on the time I get with Sarah, making sure it counts. My marriage to Jennifer ended badly, the way most marriages end when the passion dies and resentment takes its place. I wasn't perfect. I worked too much, lost myself in code and projects, didn't pay enough attention to what was happening at home. By the time I realised things were falling apart, Jennifer had already checked out emotionally. We tried therapy for a while, but the damage was done. She moved on quickly, started seeing Mark within 6 months of the separation being finalised. That stung. That stung more than I wanted to admit, but I never let Sarah see that. I made sure she knew her mother and I both loved her, even if we didn't love each other anymore. That's what the parenting books say to do anyway. 2 months ago, Sarah turned 12. Jennifer had planned this big birthday party at her house, one of those elaborate things with decorations and catering, and a photographer hired to capture all the memories. She'd asked me if I wanted to come and be part of it. I almost said no. The idea of being there while Jennifer and her new husband played house made my stomach tight. But Sarah had looked at me with those hopeful eyes and asked me to be there, so I went. I had to be there. The party was everything I expected it to be and nothing I wanted it to be. The house was decorated in these pastel colours, and there were balloons everywhere. Sarah's friends from school were running around, laughing, enjoying themselves. Jennifer kept trying to make everything perfect, which meant she was stressed the entire time, snapping at people, adjusting decorations, worrying about whether the caterer had brought enough cake. Her husband Mark stayed in the background mostly, which I appreciated. He's a decent guy, I'll give him that. He's not trying to replace me or anything. He just exists in Jennifer's life and is kind to Sarah, which is all I can ask for. There was a photographer there, a woman named Patricia who seemed professional enough. She moved around the party snapping photos, capturing moments. Some of them included me, I remember. Me blowing out candles with Sarah, me helping her open presents. I made small talk with some of the other parents who showed up. It was fine. Not great, but fine. That's the thing about divorced dad experiences at family events. You're always aware you're on the outside of what used to be your inside. You smile through it anyway because your kid is happy. I went home that evening and thought, well, that's done. Sarah sent me photos that Patricia had taken over the next few weeks. She thought they were great and wanted to show her dad the pictures from her party. I looked through them on my phone, sent her some thumbs ups, and didn't think much more about it. Life moved on. Work was busy. A big project for a fintech company that was taking all my attention. Sarah was busy with school and her extracurriculars, soccer and piano lessons and art club. I was doing the regular divorced dad routines, dropping her off on Sunday nights, picking her up Friday afternoons, making sure homework was done, having dinners ready for when she arrived. 1 month after that birthday party, my phone rang during my lunch break. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. I heard a man's voice, nervous, almost shaking. "Sir, this is Thomas Mitchell. I'm the photographer who shot your daughter's birthday party. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" I said sure, wondering what this could possibly be about. There was a pause, a long one, and I could hear him breathing on the other end. He seemed to be gathering his thoughts, or maybe gathering his courage. Then he said something that made my entire body go cold. "Sir, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. 1 month ago I took photos at your daughter's birthday party. I've been going through my work, editing and posting client galleries, you know, the usual post-shoot workflow. But something strange happened when I was processing those photos. There's something in the background of every single photo. Every one. Not most of them. Every single photo I took that day. It's the same thing in all of them. I don't know what it is, but it's wrong. It's very wrong, and I'm calling because you need to know about this." My mouth went dry. I had to sit down. "What do you mean something in the background? Can you describe it to me? Can you tell me what you're seeing?" "No," I said. "I can't describe it over the phone. You wouldn't believe me if I just told you. You need to see it. You need to see it in person to understand what I'm looking at. And sir, Please listen to me very carefully. Don't bring your family. Don't tell your family about this. Please come alone and don't tell them about this call. I'll text you my address. Can you come today, this afternoon?" My heart was racing now. "I'm looking at something," he continued. "Something that shouldn't be there. Something that was at your daughter's party." I was standing up now, my sandwich forgotten on my desk, my work forgotten. I said yes, I'd be there. I asked how long it would take, and he said just come as soon as you can. He sent me the address. It was across town, a studio in an older part of Portland. I told my work I had an emergency and needed to leave immediately. I made up something about a family issue, didn't elaborate. I didn't call Jennifer, I didn't text Sarah, I didn't tell anyone. I just grabbed my keys and my wallet and I got in my car and drove. The thing is, when someone tells you not to tell your family about something, your mind goes to dark places immediately. It goes to the worst places. All the way across the city I was thinking about what could possibly be in a background that would warrant this kind of secrecy and urgency. Had someone in the background done something? Was there evidence of a crime? Had someone inappropriate been at Sarah's party without realizing it? The thought of predators, of danger, of my little girl being in proximity to something sinister kept cycling through my head in an endless loop. I kept replaying the party in my mind. Who had been there? Who had I not noticed? My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I drove too fast, running a yellow light that probably was red, not even caring. I just needed to get there. I needed to see what Thomas was talking about. I needed to understand what I was missing. The drive felt like it took hours, even though it was probably only 20 minutes. I got lost once, took a wrong turn, had to double back. My GPS wasn't working right, and I was too anxious to focus on the directions anyway. By the time I got to the photographer's studio, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. My shirt was damp with sweat despite the cool Portland weather. The studio was in a converted warehouse space in northeast Portland. Big windows, industrial feel, the kind of place where young creatives set up shop. Artists, photographers, designers, all trying to make it in this corner of the city. I sat in my car for a moment before going inside, trying to calm myself down, trying to prepare for whatever I was about to see. But how do you prepare for something you don't understand? Inside, the photographer was waiting for me. He looked nervous, which made me more nervous. He was a man in his early 50s, I'd guess, with greying hair and the kind of tired eyes that come from staring at screens too long. "Thomas, right?" I asked, extending my hand. He shook it, but his grip was weak, distracted. He nodded, didn't smile. "Come with me," he said, leading me toward the back without any preamble. His office was in the back of the studio with a large monitor set up on his desk. The walls around the studio were covered with photos, engagements, weddings, family portraits, beautiful images, professional work. I could tell immediately that he was talented. He sat down in his chair and gestured for me to come around the desk and look at the screen. I could feel my anxiety ratcheting up another notch, my palms starting to sweat. I positioned myself behind him, and he didn't turn around. He just stared at the blank screen for a moment. "Before I show you these, I need to explain something," he said. His voice was quiet. "I've been doing this for 25 years. I've shot thousands of events, weddings, bar mitzvahs, corporate functions, birthdays, anniversary parties. I know what I'm looking at when I see photos. I know cameras, lighting, composition, film, digital, everything. And I know when something is wrong. I can feel it. And I'm telling you right now, something is very wrong with these photos. Something is very, very wrong." He turned the monitor toward me and pulled up the first image. His hands were shaking. I noticed that. The photographer's hands were shaking. It was from the beginning of the party. Sarah was standing next to the cake, smiling at the camera, so happy, so innocent. The background showed the decorated living room, other kids running around, Jennifer standing to one side. But Thomas was pointing at something else, something I immediately felt was important. "There," he said, pointing to the far left corner of the frame where the hallway led to the bedrooms. "Do you see that?" I leaned closer. At first I didn't see anything. It just looked like a shadow, maybe part of the wall, maybe a trick of the light. But the more I looked, the more I realized it wasn't quite right. The shape was too deliberate, too geometric, too much like something with form and dimension. It was like a figure, a dark figure in the hallway behind everyone, like someone was standing there, just barely visible, just barely at the edge of the frame. "That can't be," I said, my voice uncertain. "That's just a shadow. You're seeing things." "Look at this one," Thomas said. He clicked to the next photo. This was taken maybe 5 minutes later from a different angle, a different position, and there it was again. The same figure in the background, but in this shot it was in a different position. It was closer. It had moved closer to where Sarah was, like it had moved toward her. My hands started shaking. I told Thomas they were probably just guests at the party, people in the house, people who happened to be standing in those spots at those moments. But Thomas shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I know everyone who was at that party because I have photos of them. Clear photos, close-ups, candids, everything. I've looked at every single guest list you could possibly make from these photos. I know everyone. The parents, the kids, everyone. This thing is not a guest. This thing is something else, something other." He clicked through more photos rapidly. In each one, there it was. Sometimes just barely visible at the edge of a frame, a suggestion, a hint of something, sometimes more prominent, more distinct, but always there, always watching, always in the background. The figure seemed to move through the photos in ways that didn't quite make sense, didn't match the timeline, didn't match the locations. It would appear in the living room, then in the hallway, then back near the kitchen. It wasn't just a guest moving around. The movements didn't match any of the other guests' movements. None of the other guests moved like that. It was like this thing was deliberately staying out of focus, deliberately staying in the edges of the shots, deliberately avoiding being clearly photographed. I counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, more. I must have looked at over 100 photos. In every single one of them there was this dark figure. I know that's not possible. I know that can't be real. But I saw it with my own eyes, and the more I looked, the more it seemed to turn toward the camera. The pose seemed to shift, to rotate, to face more directly toward the lens. In the later photos it seemed closer. In some shots, I could swear I could almost see a face that was looking directly at Sarah, just watching her the entire time. Driving back to my house, I tried to reconstruct the party in my mind. I found myself cycling through the entire afternoon, moment by moment, trying to remember if there had been anything off, anything strange, anything unusual. Was there someone in the background that I hadn't noticed? Had someone been standing in the hallway the entire time watching the festivities? Was that person one of the guests, or was it someone who shouldn't have been there at all? I kept thinking about the hallway to the bedrooms. That's where most of the figures appeared in the photos, according to Thomas. The hallway where Sarah and her friends had probably gone multiple times to use the bathroom or retrieve things, get presents, find the bathroom when they'd eaten too much cake and pizza. What if someone had been standing there the entire time, waiting, watching the party unfold, tracking my daughter's movements? The thought made me feel physically ill. I had to pull over at one point because I couldn't focus on driving anymore. My hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't maintain control of the steering wheel. I found a rest area and pulled in, cutting the engine. I sat on the side of the road for probably 5 minutes, just breathing, trying to get control of myself, trying to convince my body to stop reacting like I was in mortal danger. My heart was racing like I'd just run a marathon. I couldn't bring this to Sarah. I absolutely could not bring this to her. I couldn't bring this to Jennifer either. Not yet. Not until I understood what I was looking at, what it meant, what it implied. The photos could be explained. There had to be some logical explanation. Someone had been at the party. Someone who was in the background of every shot without realizing it, without meaning to be captured by the camera. There was probably a simple explanation that I was just too panicked to see right now. Panic could make you see things wrong. Panic could make you construct narratives that didn't fit the evidence. When I got home, I locked myself in my office and opened the envelope. I spread the prints across my desk, examining each one in minute detail. In some of them, the figure was almost unrecognizable as a figure at all. It was just a dark area, a smudge, a shadow. But in others, particularly the ones Thomas had selected, there were details. There seemed to be a shape to it. There seemed to be something that could be shoulders, something that could be a head, something that could almost be called a face. I found myself leaning closer and closer to the prints, my eyes straining to make out details that might not even be there. The human brain is really good at finding patterns, at seeing faces in things that aren't faces. I knew that from reading about pareidolia. Was that what was happening here? Was Thomas seeing something that wasn't really there because he'd been looking at the photos too long, and his brain had started to construct meaning out of random shapes? But then I looked at the full party photos again, the ones Sarah had sent me, the ones I'd already looked at casually weeks ago, and now that I knew what to look for, I could see it. I could absolutely see it. The dark shape was there in the corners, the edges, the backgrounds. It was subtle, but it was there, and once I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee it. I spent hours that day looking at the photos from multiple angles, comparing them, trying to trace the figure's movement through the party. In the earliest photos from when people were arriving, it seemed to be in the kitchen area. Then gradually over the course of the party, it moved deeper into the house. By the mid-party photos, it was in the living room, closer to where Sarah was standing, closer to where she was opening her presents. In the late photos, it was in the hallway again, but now it seemed different, seemed oriented differently, seemed to be facing toward the main room rather than away. It was like watching a predator circling prey. I hadn't used that word in my mind until that moment, but once I did, I couldn't unthink it. Predator. That's what I was looking at. The movement pattern wasn't random. It wasn't someone just moving through the party naturally. It was deliberate, methodical, patient. Someone had come to my daughter's birthday party and spent the entire afternoon watching her, stalking her, getting closer to her, learning her. And I had been there, and I hadn't seen it. That night, I did something I shouldn't have done. I called Jennifer. I kept telling myself not to, kept telling myself I needed to wait until I had more information, but I couldn't help myself. I needed to know if she'd noticed anything, if anyone had acted strangely, if anyone seemed out of place or lingered too long in hallways. When she answered, I could hear the noise of her household in the background. Mark talking to someone about some TV show, normal evening sounds, the sounds of a functioning family unit. "David, what's wrong?" she asked immediately, because apparently my voice was giving away how panicked I was, how desperate I sounded. "Nothing's wrong," I lied. Well, not nothing. I just need to know something about Sarah's party from last month. Did you notice anyone acting strange? Anyone who seemed like they shouldn't have been there? What are you talking about? Is Sarah okay?" "She's fine," I said quickly. "Well, she's with me on your scheduled nights. But the party last month, did anything seem off to you? Anything unusual?" There was a pause, a long one, and I could hear Jennifer's confusion even through the phone. Could imagine her face getting that pinched expression she always got when I was being irrational. "No, David, nothing seemed off. It was a nice party. All the kids had fun. It was fine. Everything went according to plan." "Did the photographer seem normal to you? Like, was there anything odd about him or his behaviour? He was professional, I guess." "I don't know." "Why are you asking me these questions?" "Because I need to know if anyone was there that shouldn't have been," I said. And now Jennifer's voice was getting tight, getting suspicious. "David, what is this about? Are you saying someone wasn't supposed to be at my house? Are you implying something inappropriate happened at my daughter's party?" "Nothing happened," I said, backtracking hard. "I'm just asking questions." The photographer called me with some concerns about the photos, and I'm trying to figure out if there's some issue with the event. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jennifer said, and I could hear her shutting down completely, pulling away emotionally like I'd accused her of something terrible. "Sarah's fine. Everything was fine. If you're going to make accusations about my home and my ability to keep Sarah safe, you need to be a lot more specific about what you're implying." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply anything. It was just a question." We ended the call shortly after that on a sour note, and I knew immediately that I'd made a mistake. I'd tipped my hand way too early, and now Jennifer was going to be defensive and suspicious, and probably wouldn't tell me anything even if she did remember something important or unusual. When Friday came around and Sarah was supposed to be dropped off at my place for the weekend, I was a complete wreck. I hadn't slept properly in days, barely slept at all actually. I'd been going through the photos obsessively, looking at them from different angles, different lighting, zooming in and out, adjusting the colours and contrasts. I'd printed more of them. I'd spread them across my office floor in chronological order to trace the figure's movement through the house more carefully, to map its progression. By the time I picked Sarah up from school on Friday, I was running on coffee and adrenaline and pure anxiety coursing through my veins. Sarah got in the car and immediately asked me why I looked so tired and awful. I told her it was just work stress, and left it at that. Didn't want to worry her, didn't want to let her see how scared I was. She talked about her week at school, about some drama with her friends, about soccer practice and an upcoming tournament. I tried to focus on her, tried to listen properly to what she was saying, but my mind kept drifting back to those photos, to that dark figure, to that presence, in her home, to the possibility that someone I didn't know had been there. On Saturday morning, I made pancakes for Sarah because that's our tradition, that's our thing we do together, and while she was eating breakfast and talking about her piano lesson with Mrs. Chen and how she's working on a Chopin piece, I asked her carefully about the party. Casual questions at first. Did you notice anyone at the party that seemed strange to you? Anyone who was acting weird or out of place? Sarah looked at me with that expression that 12-year-olds get when their parent is asking something that doesn't quite make sense to them. No, Dad. It was a nice party. My mum made it really nice. Everyone was having fun. Why are you asking me that? Did anyone go into the bedrooms while the party was happening? I said. Where would they have gone? Sarah was getting confused now. The hallway was leading to the bedrooms. You know how it is at houses. People use the bathroom. They might go get things from other parts of the house. Did you see anyone in that hallway while you were playing with your friends? Not really, she said. Kids kept going to the bathroom because my mum set up the taco bar in the kitchen, and people were eating way too many tacos and getting thirsty. But no one was lurking around in the hallway, if that's what you're trying to ask me, Dad. Okay, I said, trying to sound casual even though my heart was pounding. Just wondering. I want to make sure you had a good time at your party and that nobody made you uncomfortable. It was good, Dad. It was really nice. Everyone was nice to me. After Sarah left later that afternoon to go back to Jennifer's place for the rest of her weekend with her mother, I went back to my research. But now I was researching something different. I was trying to figure out who could have been at the party. I tried to contact Thomas again and asked him if he could send me a complete list of everyone who was at the party, everyone he'd photographed, everyone he could identify from his images. He did, and we went through it together over email and then over the phone. I checked each name methodically, tried to figure out if any of them seemed suspicious, if any of them had a reason to be interested in Sarah, or interested in Jennifer, or interested in me. I thought about Mark, Jennifer's new husband, but that didn't really make sense. He'd be at his own wife's house. He wouldn't be lurking in hallways watching a birthday party. I thought about whether there was some ex-girlfriend of Mark's, or some estranged family member of his who might have shown up unannounced. I thought about whether someone I'd gotten in trouble with at work, someone from a failed project or a business deal gone wrong, might be trying to get close to me through my daughter. I thought about Sarah's friend's parents, wondered if one of them might have had some unstable relative. The more I thought about it, the more possibilities there seemed to be, and the more terrified I became. The logic of it didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was that someone had been watching my child. I didn't sleep that entire weekend, not at all. I sat in my office staring at those photographs, and I found myself doing something that I knew was irrational, but I couldn't stop myself from doing. It was like an obsession I couldn't break. I started trying to trace the eyes of this figure. I started trying to figure out exactly where it was looking, what direction its attention was focused, and the more I looked, the more convinced I became that it was looking at Sarah. Not at the photographer, not at the camera, not at the party in general, at Sarah specifically. The figure's body seemed to be oriented directly toward her. Its form turned in her direction. Its gaze seemed to be fixed on her with singular focus. Its entire presence seemed to be centered on her like she was the only thing that mattered. It took me until Monday morning when I was sitting at my work computer trying to focus on my fintech project, and completely failing to do so, before I realized something that changed everything. I'd been assuming that the figure in these photos was an unknown, someone I hadn't met, someone uninvited to the party, someone who had no legitimate reason for being there. But what if that wasn't the case? What if that was the wrong assumption entirely? What if it was someone I knew? What if it was someone who had every reason to be at the party, who had a legitimate excuse for being there, who wouldn't be questioned about their presence or their movements through the house? That's when I noticed something else. In several of the photos, in the shadows and the edges, there seemed to be multiple presences. Not just the one dark figure I'd been focusing on. There seemed to be at least one other shape, another outline, another something that didn't quite belong. Thomas hadn't mentioned a second figure. He'd been focused on the main one, the most prominent one, the one that appeared in the most photos. But now that I was looking, now that I was examining the images with this level of detail, I could see there was more than one thing wrong with these photos. There were multiple presences. There were multiple things that shouldn't have been there. Multiple somethings watching my daughter. Multiple eyes, if they were eyes, all focused on her at the same time. I called Thomas again, more urgently this time. I couldn't wait. The implications were too massive. I told him about the second figure I'd found, asked if he'd noticed it, asked if he'd seen this too. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. I could hear him breathing, could hear the sound of papers rustling, the sound of him moving around his studio. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "David, I didn't want to tell you this over the phone, but yes, I saw it. I've been seeing more and more of them the more I look at these images. The longer I stare at them, the more they seem to emerge. I don't think there's just two. I think there are more than that. I think there are several things in these photos, several distinct presences, multiple entities, and I think, David, I think I've figured out what they might be." That's when I realised that this was no longer about a single intruder or a single stalker. This was something else entirely. This was something bigger and darker and far more disturbing than I'd allowed myself to consider. I sat at my desk with the phone pressed to my ear, the photographs spread before me, and I waited for Thomas to tell me what he'd discovered. The world seemed to pause, holding its breath. My daughter's safety suddenly depended on what a photographer had noticed in the background of birthday party pictures. What could he possibly say that would explain this? What could possibly account for multiple entities watching my daughter? I couldn't imagine what would come next. Thomas took a long breath on the other end of the line, and I could hear him gathering his words like he was about to say something he'd been rehearsing for days. He said, "David, I need to show you something in person. I can't do this over the phone." "What is it?" I pressed, my voice sharper than I intended. "Tell me now. Just please, David, come to the studio. Come tonight if you can. Come alone." There was something in his tone, something almost pleading, that made me realise he was genuinely scared. Not cautious, not professional, scared. I told him I'd be there in an hour. His photography studio was in a converted warehouse in the industrial part of town, the kind of place that used to be full of factories and now had been subdivided into art studios and small businesses. When I arrived, Thomas met me at the door before I even had a chance to knock. He looked like he hadn't slept either, hadn't shaved. His eyes had that same wild, slightly unhinged quality that I imagined mine had. He didn't say anything to me, just gestured for me to follow him inside. The studio was dimly lit, just a few overhead lights on, and the walls were covered with enlarged prints from the party. Dozens of them, more than I'd seen before, and in every single one there were the figures, clear now, undeniable, unmistakable. They weren't shadows or smudges or pareidolia tricks. They were forms, distinct shapes, multiple somethings, and they were all oriented towards Sarah. Thomas walked me to a light table where he'd arranged a series of photos in order, and he said, "I've been enlarging sections, blowing them up, adjusting the contrast and brightness to try to see details. And the more I've done it, David, the more I've realised something impossible. These figures, these presences, they're in every single photo from the entire afternoon. From the moment the first guests arrived until the last moment when you picked up the presents. They're everywhere. But that's not the impossible part. The impossible part is that I photographed this party. I was there, I took these pictures, and I didn't see them. Not once. Not at any moment did I notice anyone or anything that looked like this." The room seemed to tilt. "What are you saying?" I managed to ask. "I'm saying that whoever these things are, they went out of their way not to be noticed by me specifically. They stayed out of my direct line of sight. They positioned themselves in the edges of frames, in the corners, in the background, always just slightly too blurred or too shadowed for me to catch them while I was shooting. But they're clearly visible in the final prints. It's like they didn't exist in real time, but they exist in the photographs." I looked at the prints again, and this time something clicked in my head. Something that had been nagging at me since I first saw the photos. The figures weren't moving through the house like normal people would. They didn't have natural human gait or posture. Their movements were too fluid, too gliding, almost like they were skating rather than walking, and their proportions, now that I could see them more clearly, were slightly off. Not drastically wrong, but subtly, deeply wrong, in a way that made my brain hurt when I tried to focus on them for too long. I said to Thomas, "What if they're not people? What if they're not actually there? What if they're something else?" He nodded slowly, like I was finally catching up to where his mind had already gone. "That's what I've been thinking. And David, there's something else. Something I found when I was cleaning up after the party. Something I didn't think was important at the time, but now it terrifies me." "What?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. There were burn marks on my camera lens, like something had touched the lens itself during the party, something hot enough to leave marks. I remembered taking the photos, and I don't remember anyone touching my equipment, but when I was packing up I noticed these marks. I thought they were just dust or scratches, but I've had the lens examined by a repair technician, and he said the marks are definitely heat damage. Something was close enough to my camera to burn it. Something that was invisible to me but visible to the film. Something that wanted its picture taken. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to sit down. I pulled up a chair and collapsed into it, and I felt like the ground beneath me was no longer solid, like reality itself had become unstable. I said slowly, "What you're telling me is that something non-human attended my daughter's birthday party, remained invisible to you the entire time you were photographing, but somehow left marks on your camera lens and appears in every photograph watching my child." Thomas nodded. "And I'm telling you something else, David. I've been researching this. I've been looking online in forums and paranormal investigation communities, and there are reports, dozens of them. People finding figures in photographs that weren't visible to the naked eye. Reports going back decades. Most people dismiss them as photographic anomalies, as tricks of light or exposure or film defects. But what if they're not? What if there are things in our world that exist in a way we can't perceive except through the camera lens? What if we've been walking past them our entire lives and just never noticed because we weren't looking at the photographs? I felt something breaking inside me. I asked him, "Why would they be watching Sarah? What do they want?" Thomas spread his hands. "I don't know." "But David, you need to understand something. I have the original camera files, the raw data from the digital files, and I've been analysing the metadata. Each time the camera captured one of these figures, there's a spike in the sensor data, a spike that shouldn't be there. Something exists outside our normal spectrum of perception. Multiple somethings encountered your daughter, David. Multiple impossible entities that learned what she looks like, where she lives, and they deliberately made sure their images would be captured forever in photographs." I stood up and moved closer to the prints, examining each one with new understanding. The figures weren't random, they were coordinated. In some photos, it looked like they were communicating with each other, positioned in ways that suggested purposeful arrangement, and they were all looking at Sarah. Every single one of them, regardless of their position in the room, regardless of the angle they were standing at, had oriented their form toward my daughter. I said to Thomas, "How is this possible? How can something like this exist?" He said quietly, "I don't know, but I know what we have to do. We have to find out who these things are, we have to figure out what they want, and we have to keep Sarah safe from whatever this is. Because if they went to the trouble of appearing in photographs, if they deliberately positioned themselves to be documented, then this is a message, David. This is a warning. Or worse, it's an introduction." I took all the prints with me that night, every single one, carefully placed in an archival box. Thomas also gave me a copy of all the digital files, the raw metadata, everything. We didn't talk much as I was leaving. There wasn't really anything left to say. I drove home in a daze, the photographs locked in my trunk, and I tried to process what I'd just learned. Something that shouldn't exist had been at my daughter's birthday party. Not just one something, multiple somethings. And now they knew what Sarah looked like. They'd made sure of that. They'd made sure that I would eventually find out. They'd ensured that this information would reach me through the only method that would be undeniable, through the photographs themselves. When I got home, I locked myself in my office again and spread the prints out for the 100th time. But now I was looking at them differently. Now I was looking at them as a message. And slowly, carefully, I began to trace patterns. The figures appeared to be moving in specific directions, converging towards Sarah as the party progressed. And in the final photos of the evening, they were positioned around her in a circle, all facing inward, all watching her with singular focus. I tried to count them. 6, 7, maybe 8. It was hard to tell because some of them overlapped or seemed to exist slightly out of phase with normal space. But they were there. All of them. And they were still watching. I could feel it. Even looking at photographs taken weeks ago, I could feel them watching. I called my ex-wife the next morning before school. Jennifer answered with that wary tone she always used when I called. "David, what is it?" I said. "I need to pick Sarah up from school today. There's something we need to discuss." "What happened? Is she okay?" "Yes, she's fine," I lied. "Just something I need to go over with her. Just meet me at the school at 3 o'clock. No, you can't just demand that. She's with me this week. Next week is your custody time. I know the schedule, Jennifer. I just need to talk to her. About what? I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't say, I've discovered that multiple supernatural entities attended your daughter's birthday party and appeared in all the photographs, and now they're watching her. She'd think I was insane. She'd try to take custody away from me. She'd have me committed. So I said, just something about school stuff. He thinks maybe she's being bullied and doesn't want to talk to you about it. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, and I could almost hear her thinking, processing, deciding whether to trust me or not. Fine. Pick her up at 3. But David, if you're lying to me, if you're pulling some kind of stunt, I will end you. I know, I said. I'll have her back by 6. I picked Sarah up from school and took her to my house. She was confused, asking why we'd deviated from the normal routine, why I was picking her up in the middle of the week. I told her we were going to have some quality time together, that I wanted to spend more time with her. She seemed to accept this, content with the idea of an unexpected afternoon with her father. But once we were inside my office with the door closed, I didn't know how to start. How do you tell a 12-year-old that impossible things were watching her during her birthday party? How do you explain something that defies all rational explanation? I showed her some of the photos, not the ones with the figures obviously visible, but some of the earlier ones, the ones where the presences were more subtle. I said to her, Sarah, do you ever feel like you're being watched? Like someone's paying attention to you even when you don't see them? She gave me that look again, that expression of concern that kids get when their parent is asking something that makes them uncomfortable. No, Dad, why would I feel that? I said, I just want to make sure you're safe. I want to make sure that everyone you're around, everyone at school, everyone at your mum's house, everyone everywhere is actually who and what they seem to be. She said, Dad, you're scaring me. And I realized that I was the one being the threat here. I was the one turning her world into something uncertain and terrifying. I was the one making her doubt the stability of reality. I said, I'm sorry, I'm just being paranoid. Sometimes your old dad gets a little worried about you. You know how that is. She nodded, seeming to accept my explanation, and we spent the rest of the afternoon doing normal things. We watched a movie, we ordered pizza, we talked about school and her piano lessons and her friends. I tried to be present. I tried to be normal. But in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about those figures, kept wondering where they were right now, kept imagining what they were doing, what they wanted with my daughter. That night, after I dropped Sarah back at Jennifer's place and driven home alone, I made a decision. I couldn't keep this to myself. I couldn't sit on this information and let it consume me from the inside. I had to do something. I had to act. But first, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I spent the rest of the night doing research, deep research. I went into paranormal forums. I looked at UFO sighting databases. I read accounts of people who'd experienced similar phenomena. And slowly a pattern emerged. The figures in photographs. The entities that shouldn't exist but did. The things that appeared on film but not to the human eye. There were names for them in different cultures. Tulpas. Thought forms made manifest. Interdimensional observers. Entities that existed in the space between moments, in the gaps of perception, in the places where our eyes couldn't follow but cameras could see. One forum post caught my attention. It was from someone calling themselves Photoseer. They said, I've been researching this for 15 years. I've found evidence of these beings in hundreds of photographs. They appear where there's joy, where there's a gathering of human energy. They're attracted to children, specifically to moments of childhood happiness. I don't know if they mean harm, but they remember. Once they've seen a child, they don't forget. I felt cold all over. I read more posts. I found accounts from parents who'd discovered strange presences in professional photographs. Some accounts suggested the beings were harmless observers. Other accounts were darker, talk of children going missing, of illnesses that struck after the presence had been documented. Talk of a dread that never quite went away. I didn't sleep. All I could do was sit in my office and stare at those photographs, wondering what I was supposed to do with this knowledge. Something impossible had been watching my daughter, and now it would continue watching. I kept thinking about what Thomas said, that they'd wanted to be seen. If they deliberately orchestrated this revelation, what were they trying to tell me? What message were they communicating? As the sun came up, I realized I needed help. I picked up my phone and called Thomas again. I said, I need you to help me figure out what these things want. Help me find out why they came to Sarah's party. help me make sure they never get close to her again. Thomas was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I've been expecting you to call. I think I might know someone who specializes in this kind of thing, someone who's been tracking these phenomena for years. Do you want to meet them?" "Yes," I said. "I want to meet them today, the sooner the better." That afternoon, Thomas and I met with Dr. Eleanor Hayes, a researcher who'd spent 20 years studying perceptual anomalies. She was older, maybe 60, with sharp eyes and a calm demeanour suggesting she'd seen things most people couldn't fathom. Thomas had brought the original camera, the prints, and all the metadata. Dr. Hayes examined everything methodically, then said, "What you're dealing with is real. It's happening more frequently. Whatever these beings are, they're becoming more visible, leaving stronger marks on photographs, being more deliberate in their attempts to communicate." I said, "What do they want?" Dr. Hayes said, "I think they're trying to make first contact. They've figured out how to do it through our cameras, through documented proof. I think they chose your daughter's party because it was a moment of pure joy, pure celebration. These beings are attracted to that. They want to understand it, or want something else entirely. But if you want to keep Sarah safe, you need to accept the new reality you're living in. These beings have seen her, documented their observation in photographs. You have a choice: hide from them, deny they exist, or try to understand them." I listened to her theories about interdimensional beings and the nature of perception. When she finished, I asked the question eating at me since I first saw the photographs. "Is my daughter in danger?" Dr. Hayes paused. "I don't think so. Not in the way you're thinking. These beings don't seem to want to harm humans. They want to observe, to learn. But you should be vigilant. When we're dealing with the unknown, with beings that operate by different rules, we can never be completely certain of anything." When I left Dr. Hayes' office that evening, I understood something new. The world wasn't as solid as I'd thought. There were things watching us from the edges of perception, things our cameras could see but our eyes couldn't. All I could do was accept that fact and learn to live with it. I went back to Jennifer's place to pick up Sarah for my scheduled custody time. She came running out of the house excited about the weekend, and I held her close, not wanting to let her go. I knew now that I couldn't protect her from everything. I couldn't protect her from things that existed outside normal reality. But I could love her. I could be present for her. I could make sure that whatever happened, she knew she had me, that I would fight for her with everything I had. That night, Sarah asked me if I was okay. She said, "Dad, you've been acting really weird lately. Is something wrong?" I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to explain about the figures in the photographs, about the entities that had been watching her, about the impossible nature of existence that I'd only just discovered. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "No, sweetheart, nothing's wrong. I was just going through some stuff, but I'm okay now." She seemed to accept that, and we went back to our normal evening routines. But everything felt different to me. Every moment felt precious and fragile, like it might be the last one I had before the world shifted again and revealed something new and impossible. I kept the photographs. I kept all of Dr. Hayes' research. I kept the files from Thomas's camera. Occasionally late at night, I would take them out and study the figures, trying to understand what they were, trying to comprehend the message they were sending. But mostly I focused on living my life, on being a good father, on making moments with my daughter worth remembering. 1 month after discovering the truth about the photographs, I got an email from Dr. Hayes. She'd found more cases, more birthday parties, more children, more photographs with those impossible figures. Whatever these beings were, they were becoming more active, more visible. She suggested I keep careful documentation of anything unusual around Sarah, and consider getting more photographs taken to track their behaviour patterns. I didn't respond to her email right away. I wasn't sure what I thought anymore. Part of me wanted to deny everything I'd discovered. Part of me wanted to go back to believing that the world was knowable and predictable. But another part of me, the part that had seen the photographs and couldn't unsee them, knew that there was no going back. I was living in a new reality now, a reality where impossible things were real, a reality where my daughter was being watched by beings that existed outside normal perception, a reality where all I could do was accept the mystery and try to protect what I loved. I never told Sarah the truth about what we'd discovered. I never told her about the figures in the photographs or the entities that had attended her birthday party. I figured she deserved to have a normal childhood, to not live in constant fear of things she couldn't see. Instead, I just held her closer, loved her more fiercely, and tried to make sure that whatever was watching her from the edges of reality understood one thing. This girl was loved. This girl was protected. And anyone or anything that tried to harm her would have to go through me first. And I was a lot more dangerous than I looked. Looking back now, months later, I realised that finding those figures in the photographs was the moment my life changed. It was when I stopped believing the world was fully knowable and started accepting that there were mysteries, things beyond our understanding, possibilities that science and reason hadn't accounted for. I'm not sure if that makes me braver or just more terrified, but it's made me more present with Sarah, more appreciative of our time together, more aware that every moment is precious and might be the last one before something unpredictable changes everything. The photographs are still in my office. The figures are still visible in every shot. Sometimes, when Sarah's not around, I take them out and try to understand what they're telling me, but mostly I just live. I wake up, I go to work, I spend time with my daughter, I kiss her goodnight, I try to be a good father, and I accept that there are things in this world I will never fully understand, will never be able to explain, will never have control over. The photographer called me one more time, about 4 months after our initial contact. He said that he'd been continuing to analyse the photographs, and he'd found something new. He'd discovered that the digital metadata showed the camera's sensor had been touched by something, some kind of energy signature that the repair technician had said was impossible. The marks on the lens, when analysed under extreme magnification, appeared to spell out something, or maybe not spell out but form a pattern that, when translated into coordinates, corresponded to a location about 15 kilometres from Jennifer's house. A location that I later discovered was an old, abandoned building that had been a psychiatric hospital before it was shut down in the 70s. I haven't gone to that location. I'm not sure I ever will. I'm not sure I want to know what's there, but I know that the mystery isn't solved. It's just begun. The figures are still out there. They're still watching, and they're still trying to tell us something. What that something is, I guess I'll have to figure out eventually. But for now, I'm just trying to be the best father I can be to Sarah, and trying not to think too much about what exists in the spaces between our moments, in the gaps of our perception, in the places where our cameras can see but our eyes cannot.